You know, it's printed on literally every coffee mug in the corporate pantry.
Yeah, the classic motivational quotes.
Right. It's the punchline of every commencement speech, and it's practically this modern commandment for anyone who steps into a management role, which is, be yourself, bring your whole self to work.
Oh, completely. It's everywhere.
It is everywhere.
Yeah.
But, and this is the core mission for today's deep dive for you, our resident learner, there is a massive piece of research by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover titled The Global Lens of Authentic Leadership that reveals a really dangerous reality about this.
Yeah, it's a huge reality check.
Exactly. Because depending on where you are in the world, being yourself might actually be the absolute fastest way to just completely destroy your credibility. So today we are unpacking this whole Western obsession with authentic leadership.
And we really need to look at the actual data behind what happens when these ideals cross cultural borders.
Right, because we want to figure out how you can navigate the global workplace without, inadvertently setting your own career on fire.
Which is easier to do than you'd think. I mean, the sheer scale of the authenticity trend right now is just staggering.
Oh, for sure. The text mentions what, like 10,000 papers?
Yeah, over 10,000 papers were published on authentic leadership in 2024 alone.
That is wild.
It is. And if we look at the broader context, it actually makes complete sense. I mean, we live in this era that is just saturated with corporate spin, right?
Right.
And managed optics.
People are just exhausted by office politics.
Exactly. So the promise of authentic leadership, this idea that you can just strip away the artifice and lead from a place of pure, unfiltered truth, it feels incredibly refreshing. And Dr. Westover's research breaks this down into 4 foundational pillars.
Okay, lay them out for us.
So first, there is self-awareness, which is knowing your actual limitations. Then there is an internalized moral perspective, basically making decisions based on ethics rather than, political expediency.
Right. Doing the right thing, not the easy thing.
Exactly. Third is balanced processing, which is actively seeking out dissenting views before you make a call. And finally, relational transparency.
Which is like openly sharing your feelings and intentions to build trust, right?
You got it. That's the textbook definition.
And, I mean, on paper, that sounds like a blueprint for the perfect boss. Like, who wouldn't want to work for someone who knows their own blind spots, asks for everyone's input, and is just entirely transparent?
Everyone in the West, pretty much.
Right. But the architecture of that perfect boss is built on a very, very specific cultural foundation. And the data from this meta-analysis, which, by the way, covers 292 studies across more than 40 countries, shows us that this foundation just cracks the moment you export it.
It shatters, honestly. The stats are pretty undeniable. Culture moderates a massive 42.9% of the relationship between authentic leadership and actual positive organizational outcomes.
Wait, 42.9%?
Yeah, nearly half.
That is huge. So that means nearly half of the impact of being yourself depends entirely on the cultural operating system of the people who are observing you.
Exactly. And that statistic fundamentally breaks the narrative that authenticity is some universal skeleton key. I mean, the behaviors are exactly the same, but the way they are interpreted by the receiving culture can be, well, violently different.
Okay, let's unpack this because I think a good analogy helps here. It's like downloading a software update that promises to fix all your computer's bugs, right?
Okay, I like where this is going.
So it works flawlessly on your home laptop, but then you install that exact same software on a completely different network architecture at the office, and the entire system fundamentally rejects it and crashes.
Yeah, the whole network goes down.
Right. The code itself isn't broken. It's just that the environment it's trying to run in requires a completely different language.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it. And Dr. Westover's research categorizes these failures into a few distinct areas, starting with what he calls legitimacy deficits.
Legitimacy deficits. Okay, what does that look like in practice?
Let's look at high-power distance cultures. These are societies, Malaysia and Mexico are really great examples where people expect clear hierarchies, decisive authority, and an unequal distribution of power.
So the boss is the boss and everyone knows it.
Exactly. So let's take that third pillar of authentic leadership we talked about, balanced processing.
The one where you ask for input.
Right. A Western leader operating in Malaysia might bring their team into a conference room, admit they don't have all the answers, and ask the junior staff for their input to, build consensus.
Which feels like great leadership back home.
Yeah. In a low-power distance culture like Denmark, that software runs perfectly. It builds immense trust. But in a high-powered distance culture, hierarchy functions as a psychological safety blanket.
Oh, wow. A safety blanket.
Yeah, it provides this clear cognitive map of who is responsible for what. So
Weird.
when the leader breaks character and asks for direction, that map dissolves.
Because they're basically saying, I don't know what I'm doing.
Exactly. The leader isn't perceived as empowering. They're perceived as weak, incompetent, and honestly, they're actively inducing anxiety in their team by refusing to do their job, which is to lead.
That is so counterintuitive for a Westerner. By trying to execute the textbook definition of a good leader, they are literally convincing their team that they are a terrible one.
It's a complete backfire.
And if asking for help causes anxiety, I can only imagine what happens when a leader starts sharing their deepest insecurities. Like, there's a story in the research about a European executive taking a post in Japan, right? And he heavily emphasized relational transparency.
Oh, that case study. Yeah.
Yeah, he thought he was building rapport by engaging in public self-criticism and openly admitting his personal mistakes during team meetings.
And he was actively damaging his team's cohesion without even realizing it.
Which is just so sad because his intentions were good.
They were, but Japan is a highly collectivist culture. They place an enormous premium on group harmony and indirect communication. So when that executive engaged in public self-criticism, his team didn't experience it as a trust-building exercise at all.
How did they experience it?
As deeply inappropriate, disruptive behavior. I mean, by airing his personal failures, he essentially forced his subordinates to manage his embarrassment. He dumped the burden of emotional regulation onto the group.
Yo, yikes.
Yeah, it actively damaged the team's collective face. So what he intended as humility was received as a chaotic lack of self-control.
Okay, wait. I have to play devil's advocate here on behalf of anyone listening right now who is maybe prepping for an international role.
Sure, go ahead.
If bringing my Western-style authenticity to Tokyo or Kuala Lumpur is going to crash the network, is the research just telling me to abandon my values? Like, do I have to become some manipulative corporate shapeshifter who just fakes whatever personality the local culture demands?
That is the natural fear, right? But the psychology points to a much more sophisticated solution, which is cultural intelligence, or CQ.
Q. Okay.
Yeah, it is entirely possible to maintain your core integrity while adapting the behavioral expression of those values. The research delves into this psychological framework called identity work.
Identity work.
Right, which argues that human beings do not possess one single, monolithic, authentic self. We actually maintain multiple authentic selves simultaneously. You have the individual self, the relational self, and the collective self.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because when you map that onto everyday life, it immediately makes sense to anyone listening. Like, you act completely differently when you are having dinner with your grandmother than you do when you are out at a bar with your best friend.
Exactly. Perfect example.
And both of those versions are authentically you. You aren't lying to your grandmother by suppressing the jokes you tell your friends. You are simply foregrounding a different facet of your true identity based on the needs of the audience.
Right. The core is the same, but the expression changes. And global organizations are actively operationalizing that exact concept.
How so? Like, give me an example.
We'll take Unilever. Their Leading Across Cultures program trains executives to cleanly separate their core from their flex.
Core versus flex.
Yes. The core represents your absolute non-negotiable values. The flex is the behavioral vehicle you use to deliver those values.
Okay, so how does that work in practice?
For instance, if your core value is transparency, how you flex that transparency changes depending on where you are. In Amsterdam, you might share your internal anxieties about a project's timeline openly.
Because they value that directness.
Exactly. But in Dubai, you flex that exact same value of transparency through sheer operational consistency.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning you ensure your public commitments align perfectly with your actions over time, but without burdening the team with your internal emotional state. Still transparent, just expressed differently.
Ah, okay. Let's look at how that actually plays out structurally. Because the text details a really fascinating situation at PricewaterhouseCoopers. There was a senior partner who had to aggressively recalibrate her flex.
Yes, she went through a 360-degree cultural assessment and realized her leadership style was essentially failing.
Which has to be a tough pill to swallow.
Oh, absolutely. But the data from that assessment was incredibly revealing. She naturally leaned into a highly participative, consensus-building style.
Which, again, Westerners love.
Right. Her North American teams loved it. But her Southeast Asian colleagues were experiencing deep distress. They expected more directive leadership.
So they thought she was just avoiding making a decision.
Precisely.
Uh-huh.
They interpreted her constant request for consensus as a refusal to take responsibility. So her flex wasn't to abandon her desire for their input because that was her core value.
Right.
Instead, she just changed the container in which she asked for it.
Oh, that's a good way to put it. Changing the container.
Yeah, she began framing her requests for input within much clearer structural boundaries. She explicitly stated her ultimate decision-making authority first, and by reaffirming her position at the top of the hierarchy, she provided the psychological safety her Southeast Asian team needed to actually feel comfortable sharing their ideas.
That is amazing. She gave them the rigid framework they culturally craved and then asked them to play inside it. That is just a brilliant adaptation.
It really is.
But the research mentions IBM taking this even further, right? Where they train leaders to consciously shift their actual identity frames depending on geography.
Yeah, IBM's approach is fascinating.
Like if an IBM leader is running an initiative in the United States, they emphasize their individual self, their personal vision, their unique track record. But if that exact same leader lands in China, they completely flip the script and foreground their collective self, presenting basically as an avatar of IBM's shared corporate goals.
Yep.
But I have to ask, isn't that just a highly calculated PR move? Like, is that really authentic?
It feels calculated, I grant you that, but it is rooted in parallel truths. I mean, the leader genuinely has personal expertise, and the leader genuinely represents IBM's collective power. Both are true.
Okay, fair point.
Cultural intelligence is the ability to diagnose which of those truths will build the strongest bridge in a specific room. A highly individualistic culture requires the individual frame to establish credibility.
Because they value the self-made expert.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But a collectivist culture views that individual frame as arrogant and isolating. So the collective frame becomes the necessary currency for trust.
Okay, so we know how to flex the behavior and we know how to frame the identity. But what about the timing? Like, does sharing your core values on day one work everywhere, or does the deployment schedule need to change too?
Timing is arguably the most critical variable here, which brings us to Nestle's concept of progressive authenticity.
Progressive authenticity.
Right. So in cultures with high uncertainty avoidance, these are societies that prioritize stability, clear rules, predictability. A leader cannot walk in on their first day and start unpacking their vulnerabilities.
Right. You don't trauma dump on your team during the onboarding presentation.
Exactly. The cultural system will simply reject it as erratic behavior, so you sequence the disclosure.
How does that work?
Progressive authenticity means you spend your first 6 months doing nothing but establishing firm authority, operational competence, and absolute consistency.
So you're just proving you can do the job and keep things stable.
Yes. You satisfy the culture's craving for stability first. Then, once you have built this impenetrable foundation of trust, you slowly begin to reveal the more nuanced, personal, and vulnerable aspects of your leadership style.
Wow.
Yeah, you still arrive at that transparent destination. You just take a culturally engineered route to get there.
It is clear that an individual leader can learn to navigate this. You find your core, you flex your behavior, you sequence your disclosure. But if you zoom out for a second and think about a multinational company with, say, 80,000 employees, how on earth do you manage that?
It's incredibly difficult.
Right. Because if you have leaders from a dozen different cultural operating systems all trying to flex and adapt simultaneously, how do you prevent the entire corporate structure from just collapsing into total chaos?
That is the ultimate structural challenge. Organizations cannot rely on implicit cultural assumptions anymore. They have to explicitly build hybrid environments by explaining the underlying mechanism, the why behind the behaviors they demand.
Explain the why.
Microsoft's cultural overhaul under Satya Nadella is a masterclass in this. They decided to heavily cultivate a growth mindset culture, which requires employees to openly discuss their failures, experiment constantly, and embrace vulnerability.
Which, based on everything we've just discussed today, is a terrifying proposition for an engineer logging in from a high uncertainty avoidance culture.
Terrifying.
I mean, you are basically asking them to intentionally dismantle their own psychological safety.
Exactly. And Microsoft knew that simply mandating vulnerability from the top down would trigger a massive cultural immune response.
Right, people would just reject it.
So they didn't just demand the behavior, they systematically taught the underlying logic. They connected the behavioral dot directly to the business outcome, explaining why acknowledging failure is the actual mechanical engine of technological innovation.
Ah, so they made it logical, not just emotional.
Precisely. Once employees understood the objective mechanism, that this wasn't just Western emotional oversharing, but a strategic tool for building better software, the cultural friction plummeted. They essentially provided a new, shared operating system that transcended the local ones.
They basically said, we acknowledge how your home culture operates, but inside this specific ecosystem, we use this specific code, and here is the exact reason why it benefits you. That perfectly solves the cultural alignment issue. But what happens when you have a core corporate process that fundamentally violates a local culture's norms? Like, you can't just explain the why if the how is causing people to visibly lose face in front of their peers.
It's a great point. And when that happens, you have to adapt the execution while rigorously protecting the core principle. Pixar faced this exact dilemma with their brain trust meetings.
Oh, I've read about these. These are the legendary, brutally candid feedback sessions, right?
Yes. Executives and directors basically tear apart a movie in progress to find its flaws. That direct, unvarnished conflict is the lifeblood of Pixar's creative success in the West.
But dropping a junior animator into a room in Asia and asking them to publicly shred their director's work in front of an audience, that would be a nightmare.
A total nightmare.
The need for group harmony and face saving would instantly paralyze the room.
Complete paralysis. So Pixar evolved the mechanism. They kept the core principle that unvarnished feedback is non-negotiable for creative excellence. But in their Asian studios, they installed structural shock absorbers.
Shock absorbers, I love that. What did that look like?
Well, instead of a free-for-all across a boardroom table, the feedback became highly mediated. A junior employee might submit their critique anonymously, or they might deliver it privately to a mid-level manager.
Okay, so taking the public element out of it.
Right. And then that manager synthesizes it and presents it to the director behind closed doors. The blunt truth still reaches the target, but the delivery vehicle is meticulously designed to protect the collective face of the group.
Okay, so we can engineer the culture, and we can install shock absorbers into the processes. But ultimately, a company is only as globally effective as the people it promotes, right?
Without a doubt.
How do these massive organizations ensure they aren't just elevating leaders who are brilliant at home but completely disastrous abroad?
Well, the most sophisticated organizations have completely rewritten their talent governance. They no longer promote based solely on domestic leadership traits. Shell, for instance, they evaluate their high-potential candidates using strict rubrics that measure cultural flexibility.
So they actually measure it.
Yes. If you cannot demonstrate the ability to adapt your leadership style across different contexts while maintaining your core values, you will hit a hard ceiling in their hierarchy.
It's a completely different core competency. But how do you even train for it? You can't just throw a high-performing domestic manager into the deepest, most complex cultural waters and hope they somehow learn how to swim.
You can't. And Procter & Gamble approaches this by mapping out the precise cultural distance between different global posting.
Cultural distance.
Yeah, they treat international assignments the way a deep-sea diver treats decompression sickness.
Oh, that's fascinating.
You do not pull a leader from a low-power distance, highly individualistic culture and drop them straight into the most rigid, high-power distance environment on the map. They will get the bends.
They will completely fail.
Exactly. So P&G sequences the placements. They send the leader to a moderately different culture first, allowing them to decompress, build their adaptation muscle, and really figure out their core versus their flex. Only when they have mastered that intermediate depth are they deployed to highly divergent cultures.
And companies are actually tracking the success of this adaptation, right? It isn't just a soft metric anymore.
Not at all. General Electric fundamentally modified their performance evaluations to measure global effectiveness. You are assessed by direct reports from multiple cultural backgrounds, specifically on your ability to build cross-cultural followership.
Wow.
Yeah, your cultural intelligence directly impacts your compensation and your career trajectory. And Marriott International bakes this into their DNA from the very first day of onboarding.
Right, from day one.
Day one. They explicitly train every new hire that true authentic leadership at Marriott means stubbornly protecting their core values of service while constantly recalibrating the behavioral expression of that service to match the local culture.
You know, you are watching these massive organizations actively recalibrate the psychological contract with their workforce.
They really are.
They are moving away from this naive, one-size-fits-all model of authenticity and replacing it with a demand for profound adaptability. By establishing a shared mission that transcends local norms, all these diverse cultural backgrounds stop acting as friction points and start acting as a massive collective advantage.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it requires a fundamental shift in how we view leadership.
Mm.
True authenticity is not a stubborn insistence on a single rigid version of yourself.
Oh,
It is not an excuse to bulldoze over your team's cultural expectations simply because you want to, speak your truth.
hmm.
Real leadership in a globalized world requires a delicate balance of core consistency matched with contextual flexibility.
Core consistency and contextual flexibility.
Right. You have to know your non-negotiables, but you absolutely must develop the cultural intelligence to read the room, decode the operating system of the people sitting across from you, and modulate your behavior so they can actually hear and trust you.
So, what does this all mean? It fundamentally changes the definition of being yourself. It means having the self-awareness to know which version of yourself the room actually needs at any given moment.
And that reality leaves us with a rather provocative question to consider.
Oh, I'm ready. Let's hear it.
We have established that to be truly effective, a modern leader must constantly diagnose the cultural values of their audience, shift their identity frames, sequence their personal disclosures, and heavily manage their behavioral flex.
Right.
But if our modern definition of authenticity requires this level of constant, highly calculated strategic adaptation, at what point does the very concept of authenticity stop being about personal truth at all?
Oh, wow.
When does it just become a highly advanced, culturally sanctioned form of emotional manipulation? Something to deeply consider before you log on to your next global team meeting.
That is a phenomenal thought to leave on. Like, where is the line between deep cultural empathy and becoming an incredibly skilled corporate chameleon? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope unpacking Dr. Westover's research gives you a completely new set of tools to evaluate your own leadership style and a new lens to understand the subtle dynamics driving your teams. Keep questioning the conventional wisdom, stay curious, and keep learning. We will catch you on the next deep dive.